of our water issues seminar today. We had originally had this scheduled for last Thursday, and we discovered that it works much better if we actually announce the seminar before it happens. It did not get done last week, and as no one showed up, we figured out that I had actually failed to send out the announcement. Ella graciously agreed to reschedule the talk to right now, and so that's what we're doing. As many of you know, we like to reserve a few seminars over the summer to look at what our GreenCorps members have been doing over the past year. And if you're like me, you're going to agree that it is often humbling and inspiring to see what energy that they bring to their projects and what they've accomplished. So today, I'm really excited to hear from our speaker, Ella Graham, a GreenCorps member with the Minneapolis Downtown Improvement District. Ella has been at the Improvement District since the fall of 2021, she says, and her work has focused on analyzing street tree data as a way to better understand the challenges that we face in nurturing and growing a mature urban tree canopy, and how precipitation and soil moisture data is used to manage the Improvement District's tree watering program. Her work has also included monitoring salinity to inform chloride reduction campaigns, and in addition to all of this work, Ella has been developing, as I understand it, Ella, a new volunteer program aimed at addressing rain garden maintenance. Ella says that the Minnesota GreenCorps is her first full-time position after graduating from St. Kate's with degrees in English and mathematics. Ella, it is great to have you finally with us, and the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, as Mark said, I'm Ella. I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, I'm a Minnesota GreenCorps member in my second service term. Really excited to dive into some of the more technical aspects of my project because I've been doing a lot of kind of behind the scenes work that I'm really excited to share with you all today. So the theme, obviously, of the seminar is water issues. So I wanted to really focus on water in downtown and kind of the paradox of water. And so what I mean by that, my slides advance. There we go. So basically in downtown, there's never the right amount of water. It's either too much or not enough. And I think that happens throughout cities, but specifically in areas with a lot of impervious surfaces or just concrete and hardscape. Water doesn't have anywhere to go and it runs off into storm drains. And so if we have a big rain event like this last weekend, a lot of that water is probably just running off right into the river rather than soaking in. And so then in the in-between times, we don't have enough water. And that's really challenging for growing trees. So specifically going into the not enough water. So trees, backing up just to why we love trees, I'm sure most people here love trees, but they're really, really great at mitigating the urban heat island effect in cities, which is basically where cities are going to be 10 to 20 degrees hotter than surrounding rural areas because of all of that concrete and hardscape. And trees are really natural ways to reduce heat because they provide shade. They're actually pulling carbon out of the air and releasing oxygen, so they're benefiting air quality. There's been studies where having more trees on a block actually increases people's happiness and can have mental health benefits. And they even have impacts on stormwater mitigation as far as being a living organism that can take water in during a rain event. So less of that water is running off and more of that water is staying in place. So all of that being said, when trees are first planted, it's very important to water them or they can't grow their roots and they can't get established. So here are some pictures of some types of trees that we see in downtown. So on the left, is a tree in a tree grate. And the tree grates are nice because the idea is that water can, get through all of those cracks. And then also it's still a flat surface so it's more accessible for complying with ADA. And so, because with the open planting beds, that can kind of be dangerous because people could fall in. However, the tree grates are very constricting once the trees get big enough. So you have to make sure to remove them. And that's still just a tiny little area for a tree. So very challenging for a tree to successfully grow here. It is possible. The middle one is probably more of an ideal situation. We've got more open space. We've got railings around. So we're kind of considering like all of the different needs of that space. And then on the far right, that green bag that's hanging from the lower branches, just wanted to show that as some of the weird things we see in downtown. I have no idea why that bag is there. It should be on the ground, like in the picture on the left. And so those green bags are actually watering bags, which are really, really cool. You fill those up once a week and they hold about 20 gallons of water. And then there's two tiny holes on the bottom and they slowly release the water. And that's important because then like the area holding the tree doesn't just like fill up with water really quickly and then that water just all runs off because it has nowhere to go. It's slowly released so the tree can actually like use all of that water. Um, and so it's really important to fill these up once a week because when you plant these trees, their root balls are like literally about this big, maybe about as like wide as the tree canopy of the tree in that left photo. So it's very important that yeah, trees can grow those roots before they focus on then growing taller and growing their canopy more. So it's really essential that they get that weekly water. So the Downtown Improvement District, recognizing that need that's not fully being met, we go out and water trees with through GreenCorps and Climate Impact Corps. So this is my coworker Eli pictured. And that hose is attached to a watering truck that is like rented through a partnership with a nonprofit in St. Paul. So they water trees in St. Paul and then come over to downtown. These trees are actually in like the Cedar Riverside neighborhoods, but like right on the other side of downtown. And then for all the trees in downtown that we can't get to, we actually contract with a tree care company and they go out in the middle of the night on Thursdays because that's when there's no traffic and they fill up all the gator bags or the green watering bags on the trees. And then a little more insight into why the trees aren't getting the water in the first place. So watering trucks cost a lot of money. I'm not entirely sure how much money, but the park board waters their trees twice a summer at least. We're having conversations into like, how that could be improved. But as for now, the expectation of the weekly watering falls on like property owners. So if, the park board plants a tree in the land outside of your home, like between the sidewalk and the street, it's actually your responsibility. It's not super communicated well, and in downtown, it's extra difficult to figure out who is in charge of what. So my host site we kind of took that on through like fundraising because it's not cheap. So that's kind of the main challenge I think is finding the money to pay the contractors to water or and then we also try to find volunteers to like adopt trees to water. So it's kind of like a piecemeal effort to just try to get these trees the water they need so they can actually grow into mature trees. Because I didn't mention earlier, mature trees are actually the ones that are providing all those benefits I mentioned. The little trees that are just still tiny little sticks, they're trying their best, but they're not providing those like ecosystem services or those air quality reduction or air pollution reduction benefits that I mentioned. So that's all the background for that. So now I want to talk a little bit about analyzing data and how we can identify further challenges besides watering. So now that more trees are receiving necessary weekly water through the DID's partnership, DID is my host site, if I say that, through our partnership with the park board and with our water contracting company, we can now focus on these other challenges that they might face. First, though, we just need to identify sites where trees are struggling, because we know in general, like we've got a lot of young trees that are dying, but we don't know like how many, how often. And this is in part because the park board does a really great job of like planning their planting seasons, and they're really focusing on species diversities to strengthen our urban forest. They remove trees very promptly. They have like a whole maintenance schedule, and so their inventory system, they just track sites rather than unique trees. So, at site number one, if an oak tree was planted and then that tree died, and then they replaced it with like a hackberry tree, that hackberry tree you'd think would be tree number two, but instead it's still just tree number one because it's lumped in with like site number one. So that kind of just like erases the information about how many trees have been planted at a given site, which for an operations purpose, isn't really necessary to know. But when we're trying to like look deeper and figure out where a tree's dying all the time, it makes it a little difficult. So luckily, and I think I was uniquely situated through GreenCorps to be able to push this along. They were willing to share data with my host site, and so basically they shared years of archived work requests. And so this is including removals like and plantings, and so using that giant spreadsheet, we were able to like pare it down to find the total number of trees planted like at any site in our data set, which is really, really like, I can't stress how crazy it is that we know that now. So that was exciting. And then I was able to learn ArcGIS through GreenCorps training opportunities. So I created this map. This is one of my first drafts. And so it's not very accessible for colorblind folks. So my apologies, because I do have the green and the red. But it's basically just showing how many trees have been planted at all these sites since 2011. But then I realized that this isn't fully displaying the data in like the whole story that I want it to tell. And that's because it's not factoring in how old a site is. So basically throughout downtown and throughout cities everywhere, streets are being like reconstructed constantly on a schedule. And a lot of times when streets are reconstructed, they'll try to preserve like existing trees. They might have to get rid of them, but they're going to build in new infrastructure for trees. And so there might be some tree sites that like didn't exist until 2021. And so if that site had like 2 trees planted on it, this map would be like, oh yeah, you're good. But if we're thinking of it, oh wait, that tree was planted in 2021 and has already had like 2 more trees, that is very bad. That is not good. That's like a replanting every year. So to figure all that out, I had to do a lot of thinking. And I wanted to include this like little math thinking that I was having to go through. So I decided like a rate or like a percentage would be like a good way to maybe display this. So I wanted to just show basically like the total trees at the site divided by the site age to get that percentage, and then subtract 1 from the total trees because our ideal replanting rate would be 0%. So we have to account for the fact that like the ideal situation is having 1 tree planted. So that's why I subtracted 1. So just an example of this is like a site that's 5 years old that has only 1 tree planted on it would be a replanting rate of 0%. That's kind of the ideal scenario. But a site that is 5 years old but has had 5 trees planted during that time, so like every year, that would end up with an 80% replanting rate. So that's what I wanted. However, we have no information on like what the age of a site is. That is not something that's tracked. But I was able to use GIS and my limited knowledge of Python to kind of go through all of my like attribute columns and figure out when is the first time a tree exists, or which year is the first time a tree exists at this given site. Figured all that out, and then I made this map, which is similarly not quite right on the color scheme, but I think at least displays the data differently and gives us different things to think about, and prioritizes those sites that have had trees replanted every year, so we can really like pick those out right away. So the 0% replanting rate is now an empty circle rather than green. And so this is kind of just to like, those are good. We're not focusing on those. We're happy with those. And then with our AmeriCorps team coming up this fall and next spring, we're hoping we can scope out some of these like red and orange sites with replanting rates of over 60%. And see like what's going on. Like, is it an issue of like soil compaction where the roots can't push through the soil? Is it like an issue of like there's not enough soil, like soil volume? Is it like a site where it can't get any water, or maybe it's like flooding? And like, do we need to just stop planting trees there until that street is reconstructed, or is there something we can do to change the soil to then have a tree that's going to grow longer than 2 years and actually grow into a big tree that's providing shade? So this is really exciting. And so we're working with the park board to try to kind of like worm this in, but I think a lot of it will be, our team at the Downtown Improvement District, just kind of doing it and hope and seeing what happens, and then working with the park board. Hopefully they'll, be on board to also try it and see what happens. So that's the first main part of what I wanted to share with you all. So there will be time for questions at the end if any of that was confusing. So now I want to move into the too much water part of the water issues in downtown. So, traditionally, like I mentioned at the beginning, stormwater during rainfall events just washes into the street, washes into a storm drain that's just going to go straight to the river. And so the problem with that is that, as I'm sure most of you know, it's going to be carrying a lot of pollutants with it. Leaf litter, plastic litter, any type of garbage, salt, so leading to like chloride pollution. So one thing that we do to fix that is rain gardens. And what's really cool is that in the past 5 years, I think there's been like a really big increase in new green infrastructure sites. And so green infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure just is kind of like an umbrella term for all of these different types of rain gardens. And so if you look at the picture on the right that says adopted by City Hall, kind of in the back there, you can barely see it. I'll use my laser pointer back there. So that would be like where a traditional storm drain would just go right down into the drain and go into the river. But instead, that's actually going right into this rain garden. And the rain garden's like sloped down towards the center. And then all the plants in there are specifically chosen to be flood tolerant, drought tolerant, salt tolerant. They can handle a lot of stuff. A lot of them are native plants. And then on the left is a stormwater planter is what we call it. And that one's kind of set into the ground, which is really interesting. And then the plants in there are sedges. So my coworker and my supervisor, we call ourselves the sedge heads because we've spent a lot of work cleaning those up and planting new things in there. But this opens up a whole nother can of worms because who's going to take care of these rain gardens? It's great that they're filtering out like all of this trash from the river, but then it's just collecting, and there's not really a super clear plan for like whose responsibility it is. Like the city put them in. My host site, the Downtown Improvement District, is responsible for like limited like trash removal on the streets. So basically, this inspired us to model the Adopt a Storm Drain program, which is through the city and Hamline University, where anyone can adopt a storm drain on their street, and basically that's just committing to cleaning it up. And then you get to name your drain, which I think is really fun. So we did that with rain gardens. Right now it's just in downtown. So here's a screenshot of our map. So the green ones are available to adopt, the blue ones are adopted. People can name their rain gardens, and then we've made t-shirts, we've made signs. There's a little logo. So I'm really excited about it. We've had quite a few people sign up, I mean, for the first year. And then my supervisor, Ben, and I adopted a rain garden, and we decided to name it Stormwater Management Barbie. And so these are our Stormwater Management Barbies, and we just put that up yesterday. So I'm actually glad that I'm giving the presentation today because then I got to share this fun picture with you all. Yeah, so that's pretty much everything for the Adopt a Rain Garden program. I think it's really important that we have the public involved and invested in these rain gardens, because then people, um, I think a lot of times when you see a street that doesn't look traditionally how a street looks, with like, a little strip for the trees, a sidewalk, like everything's very linear. These rain gardens are definitely like different shapes, and like everything's not what your traditional streetscape looks like. And so I think really explaining what they are, explaining like, hey, we want you to be a part of this, that's going to lead to like people wanting more streets like this eventually, hopefully, which I think is just really important, really great. And we're like protecting the environment. We're making our city more beautiful. So yeah, very exciting. All right. Now, figuring out exactly how much water are we even dealing with. So that's where the soil sensors come in. So we partnered with the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, or MWMO, to purchase and install soil sensors. And so they're monitoring moisture, salinity, and temperature. And right now, the dashboard that I took a screenshot of is just showing moisture. So we see a pretty wide range, which is interesting. And yeah, so I think the salinity data is really interesting from this, so I'll get into that later. But as far as the moisture data, we're still trying to figure out like how we could use that to inform tree watering. Because right now, so I'll go to the next slide. So this is a busy table, but basically I just want to highlight like the precipitation and the soil moisture columns. This is kind of what I look at every week to decide if we're going to request the contractor company to water trees. Because if we get more than an inch of rain, that's approximately how much water would fill up a water bag. It's still probably not going to be enough, but we're trying to save money where we can. But then we're also trying to see, okay, how can we use soil moisture, like an average of all of our sensors, to maybe like inform that decision. So right now I'm kind of just like tracking it to kind of see like what the trends are with like precipitation, with temperature. And so it's very interesting because I think the soil moisture is like on average higher, in May, and then it's pretty much been like steadily decreasing even with like the rain. So I think that's really interesting that maybe like rainfall isn't impacting moisture. Maybe that makes sense because the water is just running off. So definitely something to look into more. Yeah, and then I just track the number of trees we water each week and then how many trees die each week. But the good thing about this system is that we can enter those dead trees that the watering crew like comments on. I can let the park board know about that right away in their inventory system, which is like a whole new thing. Before we were having to just email them these concerns, and then who knows if something is going to happen. But when it's right in their system, things are a lot more efficient. So that's at least a good outcome. We don't like seeing the dead trees, but tracking that every year to see how watering affects that too. So next I want to talk about salinity. So it's pretty consistent across all of the data from like each sensor. Salinity is always spiking in the spring. And so we think that's because in the spring, snow melts and all of the sidewalk salt and the road salt that's kind of like layered in there, that's when it's getting into the soil. And then, yeah, we're trying to figure out, is that chloride, it's most likely getting flushed through the soil at some point because the chloride is bonded to the water. But then is that leaving sodium behind in the soil, or is the chloride sticking around in the soil? How long? But it's really cool because it also, you can see how it just mirrors the moisture exactly. So whenever there's like a spike in moisture, we're also seeing that spike in salinity. So very interesting stuff. Definitely wants more analysis. So then the fun part of this is like using that data to do chloride reduction campaigns. And so my coworker Eli, who's in Climate Impact Corps, and then Evan, who is also in GreenCorps, we donned our hats and became the salt sleuths. And so we were going around downtown trying to solve all these mysteries. Had a lot of fun, made a lot of like dramatic graphs. I didn't include one here, but like had like a red line that was like toxic for plants, and then showed the data shows that our salinity levels in our soils are higher than that. Yeah, so check us out on Instagram. You can see all those posts. All right, so I'd like to end my presentation just by going into depth on a fertilizer experiment that we started conducting, I guess, last summer. Yeah, late summer. And so this is again in partnership with the MWMO. And basically we wanted to see, it was my supervisor's idea originally, just to be like, let's just fertilize the trees. Maybe that will help. And so then Uday Singh from MWMO was like, well, let's take a scientific approach and study it, at least if you're gonna just do it, so we can tell if it helps. Found out afterwards that it's not usually a good idea to fertilize young trees, but well, I'll talk about that more later. So just designing this experiment was a really fun challenge to kind of work within the constraints and try to get as many variables controlled as possible. So we were just limiting to street trees. So we don't want to look at park trees because those just have such different conditions. They have way more room to grow than our street trees. We only looked at trees planted by MPRB. We just looked at trees planted in 2021 or 22 because we wanted those like newly planted trees. And then we also just looked at like 3 specific neighborhoods, or I guess that is 3 neighborhoods. And that's kind of where the boundaries of the downtown improvement district like overlap with those neighborhoods. And then of those trees, we split them into 3 different planting types, which I'll explain. So here's a map of where the trees ended up being. So the 3 planting types, I wanted to distinguish between like trees planted in a newly constructed area, so like where infrastructure for a tree didn't exist previously, but then also those trees that were planted like a replant basically of a tree that had died like the immediately preceding year. So yeah, the 3 types are trees planted in 2022 at a brand new site, trees planted in 2022 a previously existing site where the last tree had died, and then trees planted in 2021 where the last tree had died. For each of the 3 planting types, we went with 6 trees were selected, and so half of the trees in that group of 6 were fertilized, and then the other half left alone to have like that control in that fertilized group. And then we tried to like distribute the sites evenly throughout our geographic area of interest in downtown. That part was really difficult because we were limited by like, oh, there's a tree grate here, going to be really hard to sample soil and put in a soil sensor, blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of the process there. Here's just a table kind of summarizing the species. Tried to limit that as much as possible, but kind of difficult to do so considering all the other constraints, but at least limited it somewhat. And I have the scientific names of them in here, but basically just serviceberry, and then what's that one? Musclewood, hackberry, ginkgo, Kentucky coffee tree, and then macchia tree, and then a lilac Japanese tree. So with the experiment, we wanted to do soil testing before putting the fertilizer down. So just, you don't really have to like look at this too in depth, but this is just kind of like a table showing all of the results. We sampled the soil and sent it to the University of Minnesota's soil testing laboratory. And then we are going to sample the soil again in early September. So kind of a quick summary of what was in that last table, the summary of the summary. The soil textures were mostly coarse, and so this attribute is mainly used to determine how much elemental sulfur you could apply to lower the soil pH if that's something that you wanted to do. So we're thinking that's an intervention that like could be used on an individual basis, but we wouldn't want to like just like blanket apply that to all sites. Organic matter really varied widely. The reason that they measure organic matter is to determine nitrogen levels in soil. Nitrogen is one of the three primary macronutrients for plants, and it's found in the organic matter of the soil and it's released slowly. So most soils are going to contain sufficient amounts of plant available nitrogen because it's kind of one of those things that's just continually available. Um, if a soil has like very low organic matter content, less than 3%, that's when like plant growth is going to be stunted. But an excess of nitrogen can actually harm newly transplanted trees. The nutrient kind of pushes canopy growth at the expense of root growth. So we kind of determined that like if we were going to just apply fertilizer to all of the trees, like a very minimal amount of nitrogen is going to be our best bet. And it's probably best to just wait until they're out of their establishment period when they're growing their roots. So maybe after the first 2 years. Okay, so then the final one is pH. So this is a measurement of acidity. Lower pH indicates more acidity. Optimum pH for most plants is between 6 and 7. So we're seeing, a little higher than that, more alkaline soils. That does like follow, that's a common pattern in urban soils. It can include like loss of topsoil. Another interesting one is the presence of bicarbonates in irrigation water, and that can like higher or raise the pH levels. So lots of factors go into that, but nothing like too alarming. This is the most, not most surprising, but the most like alarming, I guess, is the very high levels of phosphorus and potassium. These are both essential to plants. They're the other two primary macronutrients. And so definitely any application of fertilizer should not include phosphorus, which is usually the case for fertilizer anyways, just to avoid having excess amounts of phosphorus in stormwater runoff. But the phosphorus I think makes sense because we usually see high levels of phosphorus just due to like leaf litter that's trapped in the tree grate area, and as that decays, that's gonna phosphorus is gonna come out of that. Pet waste. But other than that, yeah. So that one's kind of interesting. And then potassium is high, but I was talking with a soil scientist at the Davy Institute. His name's Christopher, and he was saying that that's the upper limit of what is optimal, but it's not likely to cause damage. So his expectation is that factors other than fertilizer would be limiting plant performance. So for me, I was like immediately like red flag. Maybe it's the potassium, but I don't know. So we went ahead and fertilized the trees anyways because we didn't have any of these results when it was time to do it. And so the breakdown was like 30, 10, 7, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, which is, yeah, it's, I'm still trying to work to understand that because to my understanding, I think phosphorus is supposed to always be 0. But so if you have any questions about that, we can talk more. But I think so this is an ongoing experiment because we're going to be sampling soil this fall and just trying to like learn more if it was helpful. I haven't looked into like the mortality of all the trees yet, so that's kind of where it's ongoing to see if it had a negative effect. Hopefully not, no effect, or positive effect. Yeah, so definitely a huge learning experience because I did not know anything about soil science before this. So thank you to Brooke for helping me learn a lot of that stuff and the folks at Davy. But yeah, really interesting stuff, and I'm excited to see how we can do further soil amendments and maybe do soil sampling at like those tree sites that are really struggling and see if there's like individualized things we can do at those like that group of 20 that had like a replanting rate of more than 60%. All right. So finally, the hardest part of all of this, regardless of if there's too much water, not enough water, is involving the community. And it seems like it's easy, but when it's these really technical topics, I think it can be really easy to kind of just sit back and keep it all to yourself, or maybe just only talk with other people in the field. And, where you're most comfortable. You don't have to explain all of this terminology because everyone already knows it. But I think the only way to make our sustainability efforts sustainable is to engage volunteers and share information, and really make sure like the community is a part of everything. Because otherwise, if especially with GreenCorps being like it has a defined end date, um, our work can easily just have not as much effect as it could if we're not passing it on to the community and giving them the power to actually do the work themselves, or just be involved and push for someone else to do that work at whatever organization it is. So some of the things that we do, I didn't include any like pictures or bullet points, but we do like monthly Service Saturday events where we're doing plant inventories and trying to help people learn to like identify the native plants that are in the rain garden. So hopefully they're excited about it, educate people about what a rain garden is. We also really like to look at what neighborhood organizations are doing like in one corner of downtown, and then let the neighborhood org in the other corner like tell them like what the other people are up to. Like, hey, they have a really cool volunteer tree watering program, and this aspect of it we think would really work in your neighborhood too if you want to try it. And like introducing people, and that's been really cool. I work really directly with someone from the North Loop neighborhood to water trees. So basically, like they have funds set aside to pay the watering contractor, and so I'm able to like request all of that watering in the park board system, and they can the watering contractor goes out and just does it all in one night, and then just like bills it separately, which is really cool. And so all of those kind of little efforts, I think, just bringing all of this information, because the thing with an urban forest and urban forestry is it's what I always like to think is that like trees don't need people, but people need trees. Trees will be just fine. They've figured it out like since the time of the dinosaurs, but we really need them, especially in our cities. And so involving the people, I think, is the most important part. And that is all I have for the presentation. So I think there should be time for questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ella, for sharing your work with us and your fun equations and brainstorming. And I know that those times can be hard when you're just like, okay, I know I need this information, but I don't know how to track it. So that's fun to see a little bit of kind of what went into your process and the different steps you took to get there. And so it is great to see it all kind of come together here and pulled together in a presentation. When we first started with our little informal interview there before, we did have one question from Quinn that's in the chat right now, asking if residents, and maybe this got answered throughout your presentation, but I just want to make sure we get it addressed, is can residents do work on boulevards themselves? They live in downtown Minneapolis and want to keep adding more greenery to the area, or are there groups that they can partner with?
Excellent question. Yeah, so I think the Adopt a Rain Garden program is a great option for that. That's downtown wide. Otherwise, I think partnering with, I'm not sure which neighborhood Quinn lives in, but partnering with your neighborhood organization. A lot of neighborhood organizations will do like monthly gardening days, monthly service days. So just Google your neighborhood org. You can also just reach out to me, and I've got all of those resources and all that information. So there's lots of ways to get involved.
Awesome. And is there a website link for the Adopt a Rain Garden program that you can drop in the chat maybe?
Yeah, totally.
Because there might be other folks here today that live in Minneapolis or have, friends or family that live in the area. Okay, I think I see a hand up. And so, yes, if anybody has questions for Ella, you can just like raise your hand and then go ahead and like ask your question in person. We don't have to type it in the chat, or you can use the chat if you are more comfortable typing your question into the chat. So John, you can go ahead and ask Ella your question.
Hi, thanks. You were just talking about the Adopt a Rain Garden program, and I'm wondering how much training is involved. I know, I mean, I do the Adopt a Drain program, and that's really easy. Just, pick it up out of the drain. But with the rain gardens, I'm assuming like what you're asking folks to do is not only pick up like litter and such, but also pull out invasive species or that sort of thing, or what all is involved and how do folks get trained? And maybe your webpage has some of those resources, but could you tell us about that?
Yeah, good question. So right now it's kind of just when you sign up, it's just through a Google form, and then I go through all those responses, and then I just set up a time with an adopter to kind of do all of that overview training. So we talk about safety things, just being careful with picking up trash in a city, and then we talk about weeding and like how to tell if it's a weed or not. We talk about how to report like damage that you're not sure what to do about. Something that I want to add is more resources on the website, like just a plant identification guide. So that's this winter's project for next year. But yeah, so right now it's kind of just me sharing the information through like an orientation, and then people can just email or call me to ask questions as they go.
Great, thanks.
Mhm.
All right. Do we have any other questions for Ella?
Well, I have one, Ella. It's Mark again. So when you were talking about characterizing the soil a little bit in terms of, what the trees are being planted in, I've often wondered if a lot of the soil is just a lot of backfill, from construction sites. And wondering if, I guess, if it would make sense, maybe in some cases, to actually take soil samples, send them into like the University of Minnesota soil lab or something, and just get a characterization of what the soil is like. I mean, if it's like 80% clay, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to put particular species of trees in that because they're just going to keep dying, right? And so, maybe kind of expanding that characterization effort might be worthwhile. I mean, I bet it would be prohibitive to do that on a tree by tree site basis, but maybe for the sites where you notice kind of continual die off in trees, it might be worthwhile. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally. We're on the exact same page. And so kind of using, yeah, so definitely it's not feasible to do soil sampling at every site in downtown, but I think that's really valuable information to figure out, like, probably we just shouldn't be planting a tree here unless we like dug up the whole thing and replaced it with new soil. I think that's the case at some sites. So kind of with that map I was showing of those sites that have really high replanting rates, we can start there. And so there's only about like 20 sites that were like being replanted every single year. And so starting with that, with those 20 and doing soil sampling there and figuring out, and then, then bumping down to the next like 40% replanting rate sites. And so kind of just working through it that way is kind of our plan for this fall and spring, to do soil sampling just on like a smaller basis.
That's awesome. I also will suggest that you don't necessarily have to send a sample out to you to know what soil textures you have. If you have an educated soil scientist, you can grab a profile of your soil and you can texture the soil yourself. It's actually, I used to be, when I was in my undergrad, I was on a team where we used to like go out and it was like a competition to like try to accurately come up with the soil profile and describe what type of soil you had for each site. So that might be a fun project for if you do continue to get GreenCorps members and other student helpers, that you could send them somewhere to learn a little bit about how to texture soil visually. And then you could get, a few more, still send some off, but you could probably get a little better idea of, at least if you have a clay or a sandy silt loam, or what type of soil you're actually dealing with, because that will affect too, like some of those other nutrients and the salinity. Like if you've got clay, that salt is going to stick around in that soil for a lot longer than if you have a sandy soil, and other things too besides just chloride. But yeah, that's awesome. So what else do we have? We also, I just want to make sure we don't lose this comment that Noelle is a huge fan of Stormwater Barbie.
Thanks, Noelle. I really appreciate that.
Which when I saw that too, I was pretty excited. I actually just went with my daughter to see the new Barbie movie. I don't know if that coincided with
Yes.
your choice. Okay, that's what I kind of thought. So I did just actually have the pleasure to go see that new movie with my daughter this weekend. So they should have a Stormwater Barbie. I think you should suggest that as an idea.
Yeah, I think so too. They have Gardener Barbie, but we also reduced plastic waste because I just reused some of my Barbies from when I was little. We didn't buy any new Barbies, so
there you go. Perfect.
I was very worried about that. I was like, oh, I want it to be fun, but I also don't want to buy new Barbies.
Right. That's good. Reusing your old Barbies. So what else, what other questions do folks have? And I don't know, you didn't talk about the salt sleuths, but if I can find the article, there was a really cute article that was done on Ella and a few other GreenCorps members that did a social media effort to kind of create awareness around salt in the winter time that I'll try to grab while we get our next question. I think Shandy, I think I just saw your hand up. So if you want to go ahead and ask Ella your question.
Yeah, I guess, and then maybe I missed this, but is there any like recommendations or requirements when there is like new construction on like how they prep the sites for where they are going to put maybe new trees or something?
Yeah, good question. And I'm not fully versed in this, but my understanding is that like previously in the 2010s and before that, there wasn't really great requirements. It was like 50 cubic feet of soil volume was like the minimum for trees, which is like not nearly enough. They need like 500 cubic feet of soil, if like that's how much they need for the root space. But that's slowly starting to change. And so at the City of Minneapolis Public Works, Katie Kowalczyk, who just left, but she's great and I love her so much. She like was a huge advocate for green stormwater infrastructure and having that be like a requirement, like in any street reconstruction. So if you go in downtown and like 8th Street and 4th Streets, those are like recently reconstructed and they've got stormwater infrastructure that was basically put in there through like advocate. It wasn't required, but it was like through advocacy on Katie's part and then my supervisor, Ben Chardlow at the Downtown Improvement District. So they've kind of been working together to be like, let's put this in there. We know it's not required, but like spend more money and let's put it in. It's gonna be really good. And then yeah, it recently now has become like a requirement. I'm not sure the specifics of what that means, and like how many, how big, but I know that it is now more of a requirement.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we do have just a couple minutes left. So if anyone else has a question for Ella, feel free to just raise your hand and unmute yourself. I did put we do have it on the MPCA website, the little story that we did about the salt sleuths, GreenCorps members that were the salt sleuths this past winter. So I did post that if anyone's interested in seeing Ella in a different light and her sleuthing, her investigator gear.
Yes, we came up with names. I did show one quick slide about the salt sleuths, but we came up with names, and so my name was like Ice E Rhodes. It's like thought that was very clever. And then Eli and Evan's names were like Mel T and Saul T. They're brothers, so.
Oh, good, nice. Oh, so okay. So is there any other questions or comments for Ella? I will just say it has been an absolute pleasure working with Ella over the last year. We didn't work a ton together your first year, but this last year we definitely connected a lot. And it was just really fun learning about the work you're doing. So I'm so glad you got to share that with everybody. It was just great getting to know you too. And I look forward to hopefully working with you in your new capacity. Now that you're green, today is Ella's official last day as a GreenCorps member. So we're sending her off here with a bang. So really glad that she could still get in and share her presentation and her work with us while she's still doing her GreenCorps service.
Yes, and I am happy to add also that although today is my last day of GreenCorps, I accepted a full-time position at the Downtown Improvement District to start this fall. So I'll be the brand new sustainability coordinator at the DAD. So looking forward to like continuing all of this work and would love to collaborate with any of you. So.
Well, it'd be really nice to hear an update on some of the stuff you just presented. You know, if you can get us some information down the road on kind of follow up on some of this work, it'd be really interesting to see, you know, what the upshot of it is.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, you're always welcome to come back and present at Water Issues. So we love having speakers come back a year or two after, you know, we've learned a little bit about their project to see the progress. So we'd be happy to have you back.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ella.
All right. Well, if there are no additional questions for Ella, we can go ahead and end a few minutes early. So thanks again for agreeing to share your work with us, Ella, and for being flexible and changing the date there and bearing with us as we, you know, are human and every once in a while, I guess, make mistakes. So thank you everyone who joined us for being here for this special time and date. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedules too to learn about Ella's work. So thanks everybody, and we will see you all at our next Water Issues talk.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.